So the big news is they've cast 2 more people for House of the Dragon, and this time they've cast, and I'm looking here on HollywoodReporter.com, but this is all over the internet, of course, because any news with House of the Dragon, people are trying to latch onto it and get it out there, so everybody picked this up, obviously. But 2 more roles, and it's really interesting what they're deciding to do here, and gives us a little bit of insight as to what we may see. They have cast Millie Alcock from The Reckoning and The Gloaming, I believe that's what that reads, as a younger version of Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, described as the king's firstborn child. She's of pure Valyrian blood, etc., etc. I did a whole entire video on Rhaenyra Targaryen, so I'll link the House of the Dragon playlist in the description below, so you can check out all those character studies. It's basic overviews of these characters we're going to definitely see in House of the Dragon during the Dance of the Dragons. So we're going to see a younger Rhaenyra Targaryen. And also, Emily Carey has been cast as a younger version of Alicent Hightower, the daughter of Otto Hightower, who I just talked about as well in the last House of the Dragon video. So the question is why? I mean, this obviously tells us we're going to see flashbacks of some sort or multiple timelines. I really wish they'd go back as far as Aegon the Conqueror, because my favorite Targaryens that I've read about that I've never seen on screen other than artwork or whatever is Rhaenyra and Visenya Targaryen, the original sister wives to Aegon the Conqueror. So maybe they'll somehow jump back to Aegon's conquest and see, aspects of that as well. I'd really love to see that in House of the Dragon. So, but it looks like they are obviously focusing, as we mentioned plenty of times, they're focusing on the Dance of the Dragons, obviously with who they cast. But this tells us we're going to see flashbacks. We're going to see younger versions of these characters. And I don't know how often. This could be one time in one episode, just like we saw young Ned a couple times, but maybe it's just a couple times for a couple of flashbacks. But it could be more significant than that. And so now, knowing that we're going to see younger versions, I can kind of give you an idea of what I think we're going to see on House of the Dragon, because we kind of know from the books and history and written lore and all that good stuff, what went on while they were younger as well. Now, we've already talked about the Dance of the Dragons and basically a big overview of that, so that video will be in the playlist as well for House of the Dragon. We've talked about that before. We've talked about Rhaenyra during the Dance of the Dragon. We've talked about Queen Alicent. We've talked about Otto Hightower and Daemon Targaryen, the Rogue Prince. So we've talked about all these people, but what did they do when they were younger that could be worth seeing in the show? Now, I mentioned a little bit of this before, but let's start with Rhaenyra. At 16, she took over Dragonstone. She was named the Crown Princess because her father, Viserys I Targaryen, named her the heir of the Iron Throne, so she took over Dragonstone. That's where the Crown Prince or Princess usually stays, so she ruled Dragonstone at a very young age of 16. And during this time where people knew she was going to be the next queen of Westeros, of course, she was courted by a lot of men from all different houses. You had Blackwoods and Brackens and Freys and Lannisters and Strongs and all these different houses, all these men and people trying to, get her hand in marriage. But she ended up marrying Lenore Valerion from House Valerion, of course, due to her father kind of saying, you're no longer going to be the heir, damn it, if you don't marry Lenore. And so she ended up doing that, even though she was not interested in him at all and thought he would be a better fit for one of her brothers. And as I mentioned before, Rhaenyra and Lenore had 3 sons together. They had Jacaerys or Jace, they had Lucerys or Luke, and Joffrey or Joff as well. Basically, it's just kind of a regular background for a would-be princess, but why would we see this in a flashback or maybe even full episodes where they're younger? But of course, this is Westeros, and it was rumored that those 3 children I just mentioned were not actually the offspring of Lenore Valerion, but the offspring of her so-called lover, Sir Harwin Strong, because all 3 were born with brown hair. So there's going to be some drama there, and that probably ties in a little bit to Queen Alicent as well, because she was well aware of all this, and apparently they were actually pretty good friends back in the day, although, again, during the Dance of the Dragons, they were mortal enemies because of the whole thing with Aegon, her son, being Queen Alicent's son, where she was trying to get him on the throne, and did, when Queen Rhaenyra was the actual heir. But the point being that at one time they actually got along. So back in her younger days, Queen Alicent stayed in court after her father was sent back to Old Town after being handed the king. She stayed there and took care of the old king, King Jaehaerys, which we may see him now as well, the old king or the good king. He was one of the great Targaryen kings, some say the greatest, and a lot of people thought Jon Snow's real name would be Jaehaerys instead of Aegon. But of course, Mushroom, as I mentioned before, says that basically Alicent was also deflowered by Daemon Targaryen, who would eventually marry Rhaenyra Targaryen. So there's going to be some juicy stuff in there. I really hope they cast Mushroom, because we need to see Mushroom. We can't just go by the word of some boring-ass guy from the Citadel. And at the same time, her father, Sir Otto Hightower, and Prince Daemon were at odds with each other. So there's going to be some inter-family quarrels here, some good juicy stuff. So we really need to see Mushroom's perspective. So I hope they cast Mushroom. the truth of these things have never really been uncovered. It's just speculation at this point. So anyway, in the years that followed, she eventually married King Viserys after his first wife died, and of course it sets up the Dance of the Dragons, where she is the queen, but of course her husband is the father of Rhaenyra, who is the named heir, and then once he dies, they all kind of ignore his wishes and make Aegon II king, being Alicent's son, and that starts the Dance of the Dragons in the first place. Both of these ladies wanted to be essentially kind of the first lady of the realm, but in the famous words of Highlander, there can be only one.